Hello divers, and welcome to the Dive Podcast. My name is Paul Critcher, and I'll be presenting this regular dip into the oceans in which we talk all things diving. Everything from discovering the best diving destinations to interviews with scuba icons, and hopefully a few laughs thrown in for good measure. And we want to hear from you too. So please get in contact with us on Twitter using the hashtag DivePodcast, or email us at podcast@dive.uk.com, and we'll do our best to involve you in the show. We'd also love to hear your It Happened to Me stories, those interesting or unusual experiences from your own diving life. It could be anything from having to deal with a serious incident, or an experience to learn from, or something a little more light-hearted, like the diver who found a spider in his mask halfway through a dive. You can see examples of those at divemagazine.co.uk, but the first topic we want to talk about today is sharks. The first shark I saw was on Shark Reef, Ras Mohammed, where a beautiful silky shark came right up to us, very close to the reef. And I knew that something special was happening because the dive master was going wild. And even though I'd only done a few dives, in fact I've just learned to dive, I could recognise it was a very special moment. There's no denying there's something very special about these fish, and any dive that involves a shark is a special one. On that theme, with us today is arguably the best shark photographer in the world. Douglas David Seifert is Dive's world editor and has been working with the team at Dive for more than 20 years. He's super experienced, super talented, and a great guy too. Hello Douglas, and welcome to the Dive Podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Douglas, you're Dive's world editor, which is fitting because you're on the other side of the world. Where are you today?
I'm in the magical city of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and I have a great view of the ocean, and I'm wondering if there are any giant Pacific octopus wandering around the shores waiting for me to come visit.
Well, we'll get to octopus a bit later, but let's get straight to it with regards to shark diving. You used to do that in what was described as a yum yum yellow wetsuit. First of all, I want to know why, and secondly, are you mad?
Oh yes, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Well, the fact is that sharks have monochromatic vision. They don't see color the way that humans do, so yum yum yellow is only yum yum yellow to us. To the shark, which sees contrast very well, it just stands out as a really bright object worthy of their investigation. And if you want to photograph sharks, it's easier if they come to you.
So tell us, how did you first get into diving?
Well, I grew up in the state of Florida in the 1960s and 70s, and although it wasn't common to go diving, it certainly wasn't unnatural. It was the most obvious progression from the snorkeling I was doing since the very earliest times I can remember, because you could only snorkel so deep, and there were things that were deeper, and you'd hold your breath and go down and look at them, and you just couldn't stay long enough. So eventually I took some diving classes back in 1974, but I couldn't work out the math, so I didn't actually get certified for a number of years later. So we just borrowed people's parents' dive gear and dived illegally.
And then, of course, photography. How did that come about? How did your interest start up in photography?
Yeah, well, it was all very strange. I was planning on a gap year, going scuba diving in Asia Pacific. And so just before I left, my parents gave me an underwater camera for Christmas, and I was so confused as to what I was supposed to do with it. I was really not all that interested in photography, but, well, I had this thing, and I was going diving, so I headed out on my trip, and I stumbled into a dive shop in Sydney that offered scuba diving underwater photography classes by a man named Kevin Deacon, who was, I didn't know, but at the time he was one of the finest underwater photographers in Australia. And he started me off with my Nikonas.
And you've obviously become a hugely successful photographer, and part of that journey has been working with the dive team. You started working with them in circa 1995, I think.
Yes, yes.
That's a while. Tell us how that came about.
In 1995, I was still very much in the beginning stages of my professional career as a writer and photographer. And I had just done my first cover story for Ocean Realm magazine. And right after that, I went to South Australia, where I was supposed to go on a white shark diving trip, but I missed the boat by a day because I stayed for the trade show. And so as I was kicking around town waiting for a ride out to the Neptune Islands, I went into a newsagent's, and there was the first issue of a magazine called Dive International.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked it up and I started flipping through it, and there were two of my images in there. They were two images that had been commended photos from the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, and I didn't know at the time, but magazines were allowed to reproduce them in order to publicize the contest. Now, I, of course, thought someone had stolen my very valuable pictures of whale sharks, and I was very angry, and I got the magazine and I wrote a scathing fax to the publisher. A fax, remember those?
It's very telling.
And, well, he couldn't have been more polite. Graham responded immediately and said, oh, well, I think because Dive International was also just finding its feet, he would... And Graham is just very, very polite anyway. So he said, oh, I'm terribly sorry if we've done something wrong. How would you like to write for us? And so I think we met at a trade show a few months later, and he asked me to come on board as a permanent member of the staff on the masthead, and he wanted me to be a contributing editor.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, God, he's got a couple other really well-known people on the contributing editor list. I said I would come on as the senior contributing editor, which is great for irritating everybody else. So that went on, and Dive International eventually evolved into Dive magazine that we have today. And at some point, when we decided that I would do a feature called Water Column, which was now I think it's maybe 8 or 9 years ago, maybe longer. Simon Rogerson, who's a terrific editor and a good friend, at the time he thought that I should become world editor.
Yeah. So
we all thought that was great because there was no other world editor out there. So that's kind of stuck, and so I write the features for Dive as world editor.
Photography's changed from film to digital. I just wondered, what else has changed over time for you as a photojournalist?
Oh, well, there's been a lot of things that have had a positive impact and some that maybe not so positive. Certainly for photographers, the bar to entry has been lowered due to the instant feedback of digital cameras and the development of editing software. I mean, back when we shot film, it would take years to create a very portfolio, and now in a dozen or so carefully selected trips, just about anyone can achieve a variety of really pleasing images. And in concert with that has been the rise of our connectedness through the internet. We have tremendous online community where people can give feedback and suggest things and share information, and a lot of terrific education that was only available from person to person by haphazard chance is now accessible to anyone. There's a lot of great tutorials out there, and you see people's work improve dramatically. Of course, the downside is there's a lot of people copying each other's images to the detriment of a lot of the wildlife. There seems to be a tremendous amount of harassment, particularly among small subjects that can't get away from photographers, and even with a lot of the shark feedings and things have become really quite unpleasant for the animals, I think.
Hmm. Douglas, what is it about the subject matter that you still find so alluring? You still enjoy diving after all these years?
Oh my God, yes. There's no other experience that makes you feel so alive as being underwater and encountering all these endlessly fascinating, otherworldly, beautiful animals and environments. It keeps your sense of wonder alive. It just replenishes your spirit. Every moment is so precious, and the sea changes every 5 minutes. I mean, it's impossible to be bored. You really can't stay down long enough. So, at least for me, I'd like to be under the sea.
One of the things that you've become really well known for is the big set pieces you do for Dive magazine. I mean, you mentioned Water Column, and some of those are articles longer than 4,000 words with photographs to match. You know, you're talking about features 10, 20 pages long even, which Graham displays in glorious technicolor, as it were. Do you enjoy that luxury of examining a subject in such detail?
Oh yes, definitely, and honestly, a lot of these features could be even longer. There's so many fascinating discoveries we have in the sea, and so many beautiful and interesting images come out. I mean, the big question is what to leave out. They're tough choices, and generally I leave those to Graham. I remember when Water Column was not quite as long. There were a lot of trying moments for the staff. I think even for you in particular, Paul, trying to edit down 7,000 words for what was supposed to be an 800-word column. So I'd like to think that the publishing world has caught up to me now, because it does seem that long form is the only future left for journalism, because people will take a long-form printed magazine and savor it and spend time with it, whereas things that are online generally need to be faster and punchier and more like executive summaries than knowledge in depth.
I mean, your long features are fantastic, and I highly recommend them to anyone listening. I described you earlier as the world's best shark photographer in my intro that you didn't hear, but what is it about the creatures that you find so fascinating, and what is your approach when photographing them?
Oh, well, there's so many things. I mean, there's so many species of sharks, and they're also diverse, and some are really interesting, and some are really beautiful, and some really aren't. I mean, some are, you don't give them a second thought. But I would say in the sharks that we most regularly encounter or seek to encounter as divers or snorkelers, it's beauty. I mean, you have a refined animal form that's perfect for whatever niche in the ecosystem or food web that they occupy. I mean, we used to fear many species of sharks, and now we fear we might lose them to extinction.
Sharks and our oceans generally are under threat from a variety of problems, such as overfishing, pollution, and environmental factors. I mean, there's a famous quote in one of your articles, which correct me if I get this wrong, but sharks are 100 million times more likely to be killed by humans than the inverse. What action would you like to see taken to protect them?
Well, I'd like to say there's a simple answer, but it comes down to we need to stop fishing for sharks for food, and certainly for food we don't really need. Like shark fin soup is a status item; it's certainly not nutritious, and we don't need to fish for sharks to turn them into fertilizer to feed chickens or to feed fish farms. So stop fishing for sharks for food, and stop fishing for sharks for recreation, because you hook a shark and fight it on a rod and reel, and you can tire it out and kill it. But those are two things that we can certainly achieve. The problem is we've upset the balance of life in the coral reefs and in the ocean so badly that that there may not be ample food for sharks unless we have a larger picture of what we need to do to conserve this beautiful and complicated ecosystem.
There's also a big problem with plastics. Plastic bags were seen on a submersible dive in the Mariana Trench recently, and in the time you've been diving, what environmental changes have you seen in terms of the threats that we're facing more generally?
Well, it's no surprise that plastic is seen everywhere. I mean, we are a very, very messy, uncaring species that has used the ocean as a garbage dump and toilet since the beginning of recorded history. What I see most traveling and have seen through all my years of diving is now coral bleaching is rampant. I mean, you go to places and the reefs are dead as a doornail. Fish populations are down. A lot of places, those things go hand in hand. A lot of places, fish populations are down because those fish are either being used as protein or as bait to catch other protein, and it's just making a tremendous hole in what was once a very vibrant, rich, diverse ecosystem. I mean, really everywhere except marine protected areas and some of the most remote atolls of French Polynesia are the only places where we're seeing really healthy reefs. Marine protected areas do work, but they have to be enforced and they have to be long-standing.
You touched on marine protected areas there. We have seen a rise in the rise of conservation, if you will, and it's easy to get despondent about environmental matters. But as advocates for the oceans, we need to promote some positive activities like marine protected areas. Where else have you seen positive changes, or where do you think we could make a genuine impact in making things improving matters?
Well, marine protected areas work. I mean, there are great success stories, and I speak from experience because I've been writing about them in Dive and Dive International my entire career. I mean, we've seen the resurgence of populations of Goliath grouper in the state of Florida since they were protected in 1994. If you visit the Jardines de la Reina in Cuba, you see a very vibrant, healthy reef system. And again, it's been protected since the 1990s. More recent ecological measures such as Shark Reef at Benga Lagoon in Fiji are an example of taking a completely dead reef and transforming it through ecotourism into a reef that's healthy, has over 400 species of fish, and is one of the best places in the world to encounter up to 6 species of shark on a single dive. The Mosul Marine Reserve in Raja Ampat is getting better and better every year. I've been visiting it for 10 years now, and was just there 2 months ago, and I'm seeing fish populations like you can't believe. I hesitate to mention this because there's still illegal fishermen creeping in there, and I don't know if any of them listen to this podcast, and I don't want them going there. But if we want to really affect the marine environment besides marine protected areas, you got to stop eating the fish. I mean, no fish, no fish. We need to address climate change with a reduction in our CO2 into the atmosphere. This is not a matter of opinion. This is scientific fact that we have global warming. You want to call it climate change to make it sound nicer? No, it's heating up. The oceans are suffering. And if we do not remedy this, we're going to have a dead ocean and a dead planet. It would be great if we could wean ourselves off as much plastic as we can. Plastic, in many cases, is a great thing. Single-use plastics that's created and thrown away, not so much. So, I mean, and of course, the one thing that nobody ever wants to talk about is overpopulation. Stop having children you can't feed that aren't educated. The planet can't support it.
And as divers, are there particular things that we can do to get involved in helping to protect the marine environment?
Well, what I'm seeing more and more, because there are now more and more divers, for years it was very hard to get to a lot of places because there were only one or two operations, and now if a place is becoming very well known, there'll be 20 or 30 dive boats. And so we have a tremendous number of people all wanting to go to the same dive site, all doing the same itinerary, but not all of them with the same set of diving skills. Divers are pushed through a mill very quickly. They don't necessarily learn very good buoyancy control skills. They don't learn spatial awareness, why you might not want to kick the hell out of the reef or some animal. And often there's no respect for the animals themselves. I see divers all excited and taking lots of pictures of things, and then all of a sudden demanding a 7-course seafood meal for dinner. There's a disconnect between appreciating life and eating it all.
So, Douglas, we've spoken a little about sharks today. It's an obvious question, but what's your favourite shark and why? Don't tell me it's a great white.
Oh, damn.
Or is it? Or is it?
Well, it's difficult. I've spent so much time, so many, I think hundreds, if not thousands of hours with sharks, or waiting for sharks. So they've been an obsession, and each one has its own charm. The thresher shark is just an amazing animal to watch gliding across a reef. The whale shark is, of course, not like any other animal you can encounter. But I do have to say great white shark, and it's because I think as a child it was my first love, and you never forget your first love. My underwater camera that was given to me as a Christmas gift was intended so I would be able to make some images of great white sharks that I was going to be diving with that year, and so in a way, great white sharks and got me into this career and this crazy nomadic life at sea.
And for anyone listening, Douglas's photos of great white sharks are fantastic. But it's not just sharks you shoot, though, is it, Douglas? You've been taking shots of octopus recently for dive, or more to the point, cephalopods generally. Where have you been, and what is it about these creatures that is so fascinating?
It all goes back to I think both you and Simon Rogerson, or one of you was the first that said this, that portrayed me as one of the world's top shark photographers, and that was very flattering. But I thought, oh my God, that's very limiting. So I spent the next 15 years or 20 years photographing other things and trying to find a style and of photographing other things that would be equally appreciated. And so I'm very excited to have put squat lobster on the cover of Dive magazine, and put octopus on the cover of Dive magazine, because you have to have a lot of variation in life. The sea is just so diverse, and there are so many fantastic things to encounter that sharks are beautiful and wonderful, but they are very similar in a lot of ways, in the way that you can photograph them. And not so with an animal like an octopus that is one of the great shapeshifters. It changes in color and pattern matching. They're really a different animal. They're like nothing else in the ocean. They're very interactive often. You can see their intelligence, and you can see them problem solving in ways that you don't easily observe in other animals. You might imagine that a white shark is trying to figure out how to get into the cage, but probably it isn't. An octopus would have already gone in through the cage and gone through your pockets and be back out. They're just much more interesting in some ways, and they all have their own beauty, so it's worth spending time with all of them.
What of the ones that you did spend time with, which were the most notable, and why?
I'm endlessly fascinated by the wonderpuss and mimic octopus that you find in the Indo-Pacific, because these are long-armed octopus that live in the sand, that have really nice coloration, as they go about their octopus business of hunting and avoiding predators, they put out these patterns that are just incredible to watch, and you sort of go into an octopus trance. An amazing phenomenon is the giant cuttlefish mating aggregation that happens in South Australia. We didn't have space to include any images of that in this feature on cephalopods, but you get up to 80,000 cuttlefish all mating in a very small stretch of reef, and very dramatic displays of males trying to dominate each other to get access to mate with the female, and smaller males imitating females so they can sneak in while the bigger males are fighting, and they can mate with the females. It's an incredible show, and it takes place in about 5 meters of water in the month of May in South Australia. That's really exciting. Hopefully one of these days, if their numbers ever come back, I'll get to dive with some Humboldt squid down in Mexico. We're trying to find a reliable population that we can access, but that'll be hopefully next year. Oh, there's just endless amounts of beautiful octopus, and as I say, we have these giant octopus here in British Columbia, and anytime you can encounter them, it makes your day.
Thanks, Douglas. And also, I note there that I've been mispronouncing it for years. I always called it cephalopods, but it's cephalopods you describe it as.
Well, you can really go either way. I mean, Alex Mustard likes to call them cephalopods, which is very correct because the cephalos is from the Greek. But the word has pretty much become anglicized, so cephalopod is fine too. The only thing that you really should be specific about is there is no octopi. It's octopus or octopuses, or if you're pedantic, octopodes, but there's no octopi.
That's the first rule of sub-editing. Octopuses.
Everybody loves it when I correct them on that.
So what's next for you, Douglas? What photography trips are you hoping to make in the future?
Oh, I'm up for anything. You know, I seek beauty and look for behavior and observe anything that's available and try and capture some nuances in an image. I'd like to spend more time with ocean sunfish. I don't have any plans on that yet. Basking sharks I haven't seen since 2000. I'm far from done with whales or sharks. Japan is definitely worth some extensive exploration, and I'd love to return to Papua New Guinea. So I don't know. I do know my next actual trip is back to Indonesia, and I know that every dive will produce something marvelous.
And I've seen photos of you with your luggage, and I know that there's stacks of equipment that go with you on these trips. What would interest me though was what luxury item would you like to take on a liveaboard trip if you could mix that in with some of your strobes and lenses?
Well, I already do take a luxury item. I'm fortunate enough to have my darling wife Emily with me on all my trips. And I also take along some Beethoven, Beatles, and 80s music and a few good books, and you don't really need much more than that.
You've been diving for 25 years plus, Douglas, but can you pick a few highlights out from some of your trips? You've had more than your fair share of once-in-a-lifetime trips.
Yeah, I guess I've had a pretty good run of it. Hopefully I'm only halfway. Well, it's relative, isn't it? I mean, how can you single anything out? The first time you see a dugong, or the 100th time you see a whale shark? Having an octopus reach out to touch your finger, or investigate the lens of your camera? I mean, whales always take your breath away. Sharks are never boring, always beautiful, nothing to be taken for granted. Spawning aggregations of thousands of fish, feeding aggregations of manta rays, any frogfish. But really, I've come to realize a bit late in my career that what makes a lot of these once-in-a-lifetime trips are the people you share these trips with. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that have a very special place in my heart because of the things that we shared together. We were all there and saw something great or experienced something great, or just had a great bit of luck together. And some of those people are no longer with us, and that's what really makes it once in a lifetime is the people you share these things with. Now, having said that, mostly I try and dive alone with my wife because and a guide, because more people can often impact the experience you're going to have with the individual sea life. But back on the boat, it's terrific. Everybody gets together and say, "Oh, did you see that? You see that triggerfish with her egg nest?" Like, "Oh yeah, I got some really good shots of that." Or, "Oh wow, it bit my ear." Those are the real once in a lifetime moments, and can't be recreated.
Thank you, Douglas. And if you'd like to see more of his work, go to divemagazine.co.uk, where you can also subscribe to the magazine, which of course this month features Douglas's feature on cephalopods. So it seems like a good point to break for our surface interval, during which we can hear a few messages from our sponsors. See you after the break. Okay, so then we have some messages from any sponsors you might have, and then come back after the break. Next up is an interview with award-winning underwater photographer Vanessa Mignon, whose article on humpback whales features in this month's dive. Vanessa is originally from Brittany in France and now lives in Sydney, Australia, which is the perfect base for her frequent trips to the Great Barrier Reef and further afield to Tonga, where she swims with humpback whales. Vanessa, in this issue of Dive you write, "My life changed forever 12 years ago when for the first time I looked into the eye of a whale and it looked back at me. I was overwhelmed with emotion." Tell us about that moment.
Well, I guess there were a lot of things that happened that day. There was the anticipation and the excitement because this trip had been planned for months. So obviously, I was like just waiting for it, and I'd been hoping for that moment for so long. And I guess you never know what to expect because it's not something you do every day, and they are such massive animals. And I got in the water, and I guess the one thing that really, really got to me is that moment of acknowledgement. Like the whale literally looked back at us, and you could see the awareness, and you could see the acknowledgement, and you could see that at that point of time, the animal was actually deciding to stay or to leave. And it was really to see that level of consciousness, that eye looking back at you, it really got to me. And I think, it's a combination of everything. It's the fact that I'd been waiting for that moment for so long, and suddenly experiencing it was such a humbling moment. And this such a big, big animal. And yet, they just look at you and they, I guess we have some curiosity towards us. And also the one thing that for me was unbelievable is I felt so alive. When I was doing this, it was kind of at the time, my first trip, I was doing it as a passion trip. And my normal life was to be in an office all day long in front of the computer, and a busy life living in Sydney. It's such a big city. It's always traffic. It's always noisy. And suddenly at that moment, everything kind of shut down. Everything became silent. and I was at peace, and I just felt that overwhelming feeling of peace and being alive, being where I belong. And I know it's hard to explain, but I just felt it in my body. And I guess that's why I keep doing it. It's because whenever I'm with them, I just feel that I am at peace and nothing else matters. Everything kind of stops. And I forget about the stress of the day. I forget about the bills I have to pay back home. I'm just in the moment. I am in the present. I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not worrying about the future. I'm just there in the moment.
And how did it come about that you were in Tonga swimming with humpback whales?
Well, what happened is that I've always had that passion for the ocean and that affinity for the ocean. So I grew up in Brittany. So I always was, near the coast, on the beach, on a boat. And also my two grandfathers, they were in the Navy. So I really grew up listening, they were in the Navy ago, and they were like in the South Pacific. And they were telling me all those amazing stories. And when I moved to Australia, I was spending again a lot of time near the ocean. And I started witnessing the migration, because every year they actually come up the coast of Australia on both sides, on the west side. And you can actually go and sit on a cliff, and you can see them just sitting from a cliff. And every year I would do that, and I would be watching them. And then I saw a TV show telling us that it was possible to go to Tonga and to swim with them. So I thought, I really want to do that. I think that's what I need to do. I just felt it. So I went to Tonga for the first time in 2007, and I was just hooked, I just like, wow, I need to go back every year because those animals are amazing. And that's what I've been doing every year. I've been going back since that very first moment, that very first encounter.
You're a fantastic underwater photographer with a real affinity for these whales. What is it about them that you find so fascinating?
I think it's really how intelligent they are, and how self-aware and conscious they are. They are very conscious of their environment, of their space, of us being in the water. I love everything in the ocean. I love little critters and I love big critters, but I guess with fish and macro photography, you don't get that level of awareness and you don't get that interaction that you can get from a marine mammal. I've been in the water with animals literally coming at you and being curious around you. I have had animals coming and you can see they want to play. They chase you in the water and they're like, oh, what are you? And it's really that curiosity, that inquisitive nature. And they really have their own personalities. And they also have days where they're like, oh, you know what, I'm not having a good day, I don't want to be around people. Or the next day you see the same animal and they really want to actually, interact with you. And that's really what I enjoy, that level of intelligence, that consciousness, that awareness, and that interest in us people. And of course the fact that we know so little about them, and every time I learn new things, and even the whale song can be different every year, and you see different behavior, and so that's why I keep going back. It just, and that's back to that feeling I mentioned before, that amazing feeling, and the fact that I really feel alive when I'm with them, and it's not something I feel with any other animal.
You also write about what a privilege it is to swim with a mother and calf. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I've been very lucky to do it many times over the years. One thing I really need to mention at this stage is that mother and calf, they're very, very special. And we have to keep in mind that those mother humpbacks, they travel a very long way to give birth, because if the baby was born in Antarctica, it could not survive. There is just not enough blubber for the baby to survive. So those mothers travel all the way to Tonga to give birth. And during that time, there is no food or very little food. So it's a big, big commitment on the part of the mother, traveling all the way, giving birth, then feeding that baby, and then going back with that baby and protecting it. So the reason I'm saying this is because with mother and calf, you have to take extra care. It's not a question of just seeing them and thinking, oh, I'm just going to get in the water with them. You really need to spend more time observing them from the boat and making sure they are comfortable. So if you see them moving a fair bit, or if you see they're trying to avoid, being around a boat, then please don't go around them. But if you see they are resting and they seem settled, then you can get in the water, but always from a distance, always keep the distance from the boat so that you don't interrupt them, and go to them very, very slowly. And with mother and calf, you really have to look at the sign and look at the behavior and making sure, again, you're not disturbing them. And when you follow those rules and you actually end up with what I would say, kind of maybe not receptive is the word, but whales which they are comfortable with you, then you get to witness a very tender moment, because humpback mother and the calf, they have a very physical and strong bond. So usually the baby will actually go and kind of cuddle. So you see the baby giving a little headbutt, and the mother kind of putting the baby in between the pectoral fin, and it's just amazing the way they caress the babies and hold the babies, and even I've seen babies, they're sleeping and the mother is pushing the baby to the surface so that it can sleep and breathe at the same time. So it's a very kind of unconditional love, and those babies, they're still about 3 meters long, so they're not your standard babies, but the behavior, and they're so vulnerable. It's just, I get goosebumps just thinking about them, that love, that commitment. I mean, I don't know many animals who will travel all that way and put so much pressure on their body so that they can raise and protect a baby. It's hard to assess, but the estimate is that those mothers are going to lose about 1/3 of their body weight during that migration time. So it's pretty amazing. It's very, very amazing to witness.
Whaling used to take place on an industrial scale, but with a few notable exceptions, most countries have now stopped. But swimming whales has become a popular pastime which brings its own pressures on the animals. In what ways have you seen tourist behaviour have an impact on whale behaviour?
What I've witnessed over the years, especially in Tonga, is that there are more and more boats, and that's because there is more and more demand. So more people are going, more tourists are going, and that's obviously meaning a lot of boats on the water. And one of the consequences of those many boats on the water is that there is more pressure on the animal. They get more boats around them. There is sometimes boats to actually queue because everybody is talking to each other on the radio. So pretty much after a couple of hours on the water, everybody knows where the good whales, and that's why I'm saying that, because good, it's more, I don't know, I'm not going to go into too much detail in there, but yeah, so the boats will have a tendency to actually always go looking for mother and calf, or go where they know there is a possibility of a good swim, and as a result the animal don't get a break. Now in Tonga there are regulations saying that there should be a break in between boats so that the animal have a chance to rest. And unfortunately, because there are so many hours in a day and there are a lot of boats and a lot of people and everybody wants to swim, now, the animals are not necessarily getting the break they need. And what I've started seeing is actually whales changing direction, or avoiding boats, or going and diving deeper and longer than usual. So you can see they're obviously being disturbed. Now, the other thing I've witnessed, not in Tonga, but in another country, is the fact that the demand is now unregulated. And that's not because the authorities are not putting in place regulation. There are regulation, but it's very hard to control what's happening in the ocean. It's such a big ocean. How do you control every day what's happening? So there are actually people now going on boats which are not licensed to do it. They don't have a permit. And one of the big issues with that is that they are not trained to be around the animal in the proper way. And this has many consequences. Not being trained to approach the animal properly is, often meaning you're not going to respect the animal, you're not going to give them the space that they need. And there is, of course, issues with respect. So I've seen actually people diving, like free diving, on rescuing animals. I've seen also people using straws on animals, which is a big, big no-no. And that's the issue when you start having boats which are not licensed, is that because they're not trained for the experience, or they do not understand the animal, or they don't know the animals, they let people get away with behavior which is then going to disturb the animal. And there is also the safety. If you're not trained to interact with those animals, at the end of the day, they're still massive, massive giants. So it's very easy for an accident to happen. You're in the open water, you get people who are not trained properly about the safety, or who might not know the behavior of the animal, because it's not something they do usually. It's just that they got, people wanting to book. So unfortunately, in the last few years, I've seen a few instances where it's not a good thing. It's not good for the animal, but it's also not good for the industry to have that lack of regulation, because then if you start seeing bad things, you just think, well, look, they get away with it, so why do we have to respect all of those rules? And there are a lot of good operators trying to do the right thing and doing the very best they can to do the right thing. But there is also the pressure we have of the customer saying, well, so-and-so did this, I just saw it, why can we not do that? And then you end up, really having to balance that high expectation from people with everything that is happening in front of you. Does that make sense?
So is better regulation the way to go to reducing that impact?
Better regulation, better control, and better training of the crew, and also better education of the people who have booked on the boat. So people have to understand that it's an amazing, amazing experience, but they are wild animals, and they are animals that we need to respect. And I can tell you, after so many years of doing this, if you respect the animal, if you give him time to adjust to you being in the water, they're just going to feel safe and comfortable around you. And that's when your interaction is going to be so good, because there is that mutual respect. If you start chasing the animal around or pushing him to dive, you're not going, you're going to see the animal quickly, but you're not going to have that interaction that they can actually give you when they feel comfortable around you. And I've seen how intelligent and wonderful those animals are. And when I see people just treating them like they're just a property, and they just think, I've paid a fee, I've got the right to get in the water, and I have the right to do whatever, it just really breaks my heart, because I just feel like slapping some people by saying, look, do you realize how special this is? And if you just give them time and respect, you're just going to learn so much from them and have such an amazing experience. And I think that's why the industry really need to spend time training the crew and also educating the customer. It's not just about putting people in the water, it's about telling them about the biology, telling them why the animal is here in the first place. Many times the animals are there for a specific reason, like feeding or giving birth or raising their babies. So it's important to understand that and to respect that.
You also write about other notable whale behaviours, such as whale song and the heat run. Could you explain what that is?
So the whale song, first you touch on the whale song. So when it comes to humpbacks, usually, the whales, the male are the only ones singing. So the male, it's believed that they actually sing to attract a mate. And what is very special about the song is that it is believed and it is found that all the whales in the same population, all the males, are going to be singing the same song. So that means that there is a learning process at some stage where they learn the song. And I've learned it's not always the same song. So year on year, it can change completely or it can change a little bit. And I've heard things where sometimes it would be like a noisy door, like a screeching door, and you just think, oh, that's new. I have had a year also where it was like a very, very electronic sound. So there is always a bit of that excitement where you just think, okay, what is the song like this year, And so as I said, sometimes it's very different from the year before, and over time it's not. And yeah, the male sings a song. And if you're very, very lucky, so you can hear it from a long distance, but if you're very, very lucky to actually be on top of a male while it's singing, you will feel the vibration through your body. Like one day we were actually on the boat and we stopped to have lunch, and suddenly we felt vibration through the boat. And we're like, what's happening? And we had actually stopped by accident on top of a singing male, and we could feel it through the boat. So that was very, very unique.
Yeah.
It run, it's when the males are going to compete for a female. Right. So I've seen small it run with only 2 males chasing the female, and I've seen big one with 7, 8 males chasing the female. And sometimes they're actually, as it's happening, it starts small, and then there are more males coming. And that's really where you see the strength and the power of those animals. They would jump on each other, they would push each other out of the way. And it's really a race. It's one of those things, sometimes it goes so fast that it's very hard to keep up with the boat. And again, that's where I need to mention it's very important to watch the behavior and to assess if you can put people in the water or not. Because when these happen, they only have one thing in mind, and it's to reproduce with the female in front of them. So if it's, if you see it's happening too fast or it's becoming a little bit too aggressive in the behavior, then you don't want to put people in the water. But if you do get in the water with them, you will actually see all of them going really fast, and usually the male in front is going to kind of blow a bubble, what we call a bubble net. And that bubble net is kind of a strategy to hide the female from the rest of the male. So it's in front, it's blowing all of the bubble, and it's like a curtain. And suddenly you don't see anything, you just have bubble everywhere, and you just think, where is the female? So it's very interesting. And sometimes they will actually do a lot of circle, and then they disappear, and you just think, where are they and what are they doing? And then suddenly they all come back at the same time, so you're left wondering, okay, what were they doing down there that we didn't see? So again, it's one of those behavior where you just feel so alive and so amazed when you see, like 40-ton animal, and you think if you have 10 of them, can you imagine all the movement and the speed and the agitation in the water? It's very, very special.
You've also had encounters with dwarf minkies and sperm whales. In what way are those encounters different to interacting with humpbacks?
So the dwarf minkie, when I heard about them the first time, I was told that they were going to the boat. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, not possible. Because at the time I had only swum with humpbacks. And humpbacks, you can spend hours and hours on a boat looking for them, not seeing them, or getting wet for nothing. So when I was told that they're actually a species of whales that come and look for the boat and stay with the boat, I'm like, yeah, whatever, And I did go, and I saw it with my own eyes, and I'm just like, this is amazing. So we will actually go to the location where they are usually found, which is a section in the Great Barrier Reef. And we will anchor the boat, spend the night there, and the next day, like sunlight, and knock on the door, guys, time to wake up, the whales are waiting for you. Just think, what? And yeah, you would actually get out, and you will see the whales circling the boat, and you just think, this is amazing. So they are very, very curious animals. I don't know if that's their usual behavior, or is it that when they come to the Great Barrier Reef, they're like, oh, you know what, we are here and we want to interact. But they really, really seek out the interaction. Like one time we had a couple of hours with them, and then, it was time to go to the next dive site. So everybody came back on the boat, and we pulled out the rope, because when you swim with dwarf minkie, you have to stay on a rope. And the idea with that is that you are predictable and you make the animal more comfortable, which I observe, witness, the more time you spend with them, the more they get used to you and the more confident they get in their approach. So anyway, we all got back on the boat and we started going to the next dive site. And the minke whale followed us. They followed the boat. And again, when you are used to doing armbags for so many years, and usually you're the one kind of following the whale from a distance and trying to get close to them. And when you see it the other way around, you just think, wow, this is very, very special. And obviously, the dwarf minke is very different in the way they look, in the sound they make. So it's totally different. Every whale is very different by the way they look, their biology, their movement, and also their behavior. Now, when it comes to sperm whales, again, very, very different type of whales, because the sperm whales, at least the one I've swum with, they live in a nursery. So nurseries are usually made of adult females, and juveniles. And what happened is that, in those juveniles, there will be obviously female and males. When the males get to the stage where they are old enough, they leave the nursery and then they go in what is believed to be bachelor pads for a little bit, and then they tend to become, solitary animals. So my experience is mostly with nurseries. And those nurseries, you can really, I call them the elephant of the seas, because they usually have a matriarch and they look after each other. So they are very social animals. They communicate a lot with sound, but also with touch, and they really care about each other. So, for example, if I was to see a female humpback with a calf, I would say to you, this is a mother and a calf humpback. If I see a female sperm whale with a calf, all I can say to you is that this is a female sperm whale with a calf. That female could be the mother, the sister, the auntie, or just an unrelated babysitter. So one which is in the pod, she's in charge of the babies, but she's actually not a mother or not even in the age of being a mother. So I've got one in mind in particular where that sperm whale female, as far as we know, she hasn't had a baby yet. She's not mature to have a baby, but she's the official babysitter for a few of the babies. And whenever you see her, you will see the babies following her, or where the babies are playing together, she will be there also, which is really, really fascinating to see kind of, that family bond between them and that care for each other.
And are you optimistic about the future for whales generally?
Yes and no. I'm optimistic in the sense that, I think population for most of the species have recovered and population are doing well for most of the species. And there are a lot of countries now which are really trying to look after them and to protect them and be sure to and where they can, reproduce and nurse. And there is more and more kind of research being done to be sure that whatever we do is not having a negative impact on them. So I'm positive in that sense, and I'm also positive in the sense that a lot of people really have a fascination for those animals. And as long as we have that fascination and that interest, that's going to protect the animal, because if the whale is worth money when it's alive and if it's capturing the imagination of people, people are going to want to protect it rather than going and killing it, like what we saw for years with whaling. But I'm worried when I see the industry, and I'm worried about what I've seen in the last few years, where it used to be a very niche activities where really people were doing it because it was a dream of theirs, or they had that passion for the animal and they wanted to leave something special. And what I've seen more and more is people just going there, not because they are interested in the animal or in the experience, but because they want a picture or they want to be able to talk about it on social media. And I'm not saying everybody is like that, and I'm probably being a bit too harsh, but it's definitely a change I've seen, and I've seen people feeling that they are entitled to the experience just because they paid the fee. And by having that behavior, it's putting a lot of pressure on the crew, a lot of pressure on the crew to deliver a swim, and that pressure is then going to be put on the animal. And that's where I'm worried. And I'm also worried to see that there are now parrot boats, because, by seeing those, they're not respecting the rules, they're not respecting the animal, they're giving the wrong message to people that it's okay to do whatever around those animals. So, it's not okay to be doing that for many reasons, which is ethical reason, respect reason, but also there is a safety reason. Anything could happen. You're still in the open ocean with animals which are massive. And it's not that those animals are aggressive, it's just that they're very, very big and very heavy, and if they try to get away or they get spooked or whatever, they could actually hurt you by accident. And you would just take a little slap of the tail. That's enough to really kill someone. So that's where I'm worried, and I really, really hope, and that's what I was saying in the article. I hope people are going to do their research carefully and make sure that whenever they go on those experiences, they make sure the permit is in place. They make sure they go with a licensed boat. And if you see anything wrong, report it. Make sure you go on a platform like TripAdvisor and put a comment saying, look, I've seen this boat chasing the whale, or I've seen, people have to be held accountable, and that's for all of us. It's even for me as a photographer, I have a lot of responsibility to be sure I get the right message to people and to say to them, yes, I've got good pictures, but it's not something I take in one day. The picture you see, first you don't see all of the bad one, you only see the good one, and the one you see which are good, I've taken sometimes weeks to get, and it's after years and years of me knowing the animal, knowing the right angle to photograph them, knowing, how to approach them to get the picture. It's such a combination of things. I'm always saying to people, understand that and be patient. And as long as you're patient and respectful, and you go with the right people who are trained to help you in the experience, then you're going to be fine. They're so wonderful, they're so special, they deserve every little bit of respect we can give them. And I can tell you honestly and I would say that to everybody, if protecting them means not being ever able to go back in the water with them, or being told, no more pictures because picture is creating too much pressure, I would say fine, I'd rather stay on dry land knowing that they are being protected the right way.
And when are you hoping to be in the water with them next?
I'm supposed to go back in August in Tonga, so that will be my next trip with them. So I'm very, very excited. I might be able to go to the Great Barrier Reef in June to see the minke, but that's not scheduled yet. So it will be on back whales in Tonga.
Thank you for those fascinating insights, Vanessa, and apologies for the patchy sound quality in that interview. If you'd like to see more of Vanessa's work, check out the Dive website, divemagazine.co.uk, which has links to her videos, and you can see her amazing photographs in the latest issue of Dive. That's all we have time for today, so thank you for listening, and please get in touch on Twitter via the hashtag DivePodcast, or email us at podcast@dive.uk.com. We'd love to hear from you. And I hope you can join us next time. In the meantime, happy diving, be safe, and get wet.